G'day everyone, welcome back. Today we are starting our new topic officially on personal and social identity. This is the second of the Year 11 Core Depth Study courses, and it's a pretty good one too. I mean, they're all good, but this one's pretty good. So you've got your new booklet here today. We've got lessons 0 through to 14 here. Now lesson 0 is your concept card lesson. So just a quick recap in case you need some ideas. You'll look at the syllabus for most of these concepts. Some of them you'll have to look up. I believe it's these two here. And then once you've done your concept cards, as I'm sure you know how to do, you'll then apply those concepts with these questions here in your big boy book. So that's lesson 0. But before we get into lesson 1, I guess a bit of an overview of this topic looks something like this. The first half of this topic is very much looking at the core concepts as normal with most of your society and culture courses. However, the main idea of personal and social identity is really looking at how we grow up, what are the social institutions, beliefs, values and culture that shapes that and how we grow up. And then we take all of that and look at it at a psychological lens. We'll look at some professional psychologists, some very well-renowned ones, and we'll look at their theories on how human beings develop themselves as an identity, as a concept, and then how that helps them become a functioning member of society moving forward. The second half of this course, or topic is probably the better word, is you guys do a lot of research, and we're going to be looking at different socialization periods from how your parents grew up to how that's different from how you grew up, and conducting some research into that and using that to inform our future assessment task where you guys will examine some of those changes over time as well as conducting your own research, which is very exciting. Without further ado though, here's lesson 1. We are looking at the identity and the social self. Don't forget to highlight and date the lessons as you've completed them, and we'll get cracking. So the identity and social self, this is a rather large concept in the way that social identity, personal identity and cultural identity are the sort of 3 different facets of identity that we're going to break into. It's a large concept. It's something that is quite nuanced and complicated only because there is so much that affects your identity. As I said, we broke it down quickly into those sort of 3 levels. You've got your personal identity, so that is what we sometimes refer to as the inner self. Who you are, I guess, when no one's watching, or who you are when you are just surrounded by close family and friends. It's sort of your authentic self. The social self, or the social identity, is a little bit different to your personal identity or inner self. So your social identity is who you are in a social setting. So sort of almost think of your personal identity as something that you operate at a micro level. Your social identity is very much something that operates at the meso-macro sort of level. So within the meso realm, this might look like hanging out with your friends. You are potentially a different person in some sort of instances when hanging with your mates. And that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. So that could be the type of language you use. So for example, your social self might swear a lot more than your personal self when you are at home with your parents. Your social self might be more inclined to take risks when you're surrounded by your peers, as opposed to the personal self, which might be quite an introvert. So you can almost change your identity depending on who you're with. And I guess for me, my example of my social self is very different to who I'm like, I guess, when I'm alone, or when I'm with my partner, or I'm with my son, or my close friends. I'm very different to my social self than I am with my personal self. So my social self can take form in different settings as well. So the social self I present while I'm at work is very different to the social self I might present when I'm out with my mates, out for dinner, or even the social self I portray when I'm playing with my mates at soccer. All of them are very different. So at work I'm very professional. I sort of keep certain parts of my identity from communicating or conveying themselves because they're either not required in my workplace setting, and vice versa. And you guys might find that as well. You might find that the social self you portray at school with your friends is very much the social self you portray when you're in class with your teacher, is very different from the social self you might portray when you're at work. So it can all vary. And then the third sort of type is your cultural identity or your cultural self. And this identity can operate at a micro, meso, and macro level. So for example, if you identify with a particular religion and prayer is important in that, at a micro level, that's something that you can do alone or with close family and friends, and that's part of your cultural identity. It's expressing your values, your beliefs. At a meso level, that might look like going to a mosque or a temple or a church, for example, where you are engaging in that cultural realms within a religious sense, but it doesn't always have to be religious either. Your cultural self at a macro level can be, like I referred to earlier, like I play sport on a weekend, and then also on Monday nights. That's part of the culture in which I grew up, where I, value physical exercise. I'm part of the cultural beliefs and norms and mores of the culture that is soccer and then the game itself. But I also have that identity at a macro level to some extent too. I support the greatest club in the world, Arsenal, top of the league at the current time of filming, and much better than other clubs like Liverpool, for example. But that is part of my macro cultural identity because I affiliate with a club, and that club is in England, literally the opposite side of the world to us here in Australia. But it's part of that cultural phenomenon that we're in, and it could be different for you as well. If you're part of a fan network for someone like Harry Styles, for example, and you're part of his big social following, your cultural identity is being shaped by that, but you're also engaging with it as well, whether that's going to concerts, whether that's via social media. So there's lots of different ways that you can have a cultural identity there as well. So there's sort of the three main types of identity: personal, social, and cultural. What we're going to do now is move into our word bank, now that you have a bit of a debrief on that, and here we go. So you got your word list here. Each of these words obviously correlates with a closed passage response here. So identity is the sense of self, which can be viewed from the personal, social, and cultural levels, which is what we just talked about. It's formed over a period of time and is the result of interactions. That's very key part to note. It's a result of the interactions at the micro, meso, and macro levels of society, which we just talked about earlier. An identity has dimensions or layers that creates a sense of inclusion in a group. So remember, inclusion means, which is that sense of belonging to a group or a sense of affirmation in one's identity. If we look at inclusion as well, it's about ensuring that everyone has the same access and that they can participate in society and culture on an equity sort of basis. So everyone's sort of got equal access. So if we're talking about identity, having dimensions or layers that create a sense of inclusion, for example, when I was talking about my sporting clubs earlier, me playing on the pitch, me being part of training, talking to the mates on the team, all of that fosters and creates this sense of belonging and inclusion into a group. Other contributing factors to one's identity may include gender, sexuality, family, class, ethnicity, beliefs, social status, group membership, and national pride. So it's a very complex thing, and a lot of these can fall under your social, personal, or cultural identity. So we might even want to break some of those down now. So if we look at something like national pride, that's typically something that would align with your cultural identity. Each country has its core values, its core belief systems, depending on the nation it is and what it is looking like, but a lot of people take pride in that. So for example, you've probably all seen in Western American movies that a lot of people take pride in America. A lot of people take pride in Australia. If I move context in countries, that idea of everyone gets a fair go, or that concept that you treat everyone with respect, and you treat them how you would like to be treated. That's very much something that's embodied in our sort of national culture pride sort of things. Now, when I talk about national pride, just as a caveat, I'm sort of talking about taking pride in the core beliefs and values. I guess what I'm not referring to is staunch nationalism, or what's sometimes called jingoism, which is excessive pride in one's country to the extent where they exclude others, or anyone that doesn't fit the stereotypical mold of what that group might perceive an Australian to look like. But that's another lesson for another day. Group membership, so that's sort of what I was talking about, the soccer club, or it might be a dance club, or it might be even a cultural club, like if you have a group of people that like to play video games or board games, whatever it is, any sort of group membership. A book club, if anyone's into that, it's good fun, you should get into it. Your social status can contribute to your identity as well, so that's very much related to that social identity. So for me, my workplace and the role that I have as a head teacher at the time of filming is that I have higher authority, I guess, typically than my colleagues, but it also gives me a bit more authority and power in terms of what I can and can't do at the workplace, and that affects my social identity, because if we look at a social hierarchy of my organisation at school, it moves me up a notch. So that can influence my identity as well, and how I perceive myself, and then how others perceive me as well. Your beliefs, obviously, and that can be religious beliefs, but that can also be non-religious beliefs, things like environmentalism or feminism, that can contribute to one's identity. You know, if someone identifies as a feminist, there's a certain belief and value in equality for men and women. If it's an environmentalist, there's this idea that preserving the environment is a good idea. I mean, no duh. Other things as well, like veganism, the belief that not consuming animal products is more ethical than consuming them. So beliefs don't necessarily have to be religious, although they can be as well. Your ethnicity is probably one that links and strongly to your cultural identity. So ethnicity is very much related to environment, in the way that where you're born can typically shape a lot of the cultural activities that surround that sort of particular land. So if we're looking at Australia's coastal environment, a lot of typical ethnic activities there involve surfing, things. If we go to somewhere like Scandinavia, in Norway, Sweden, a lot of their ethnicity and ethnic culture is tied into snow activities, and there's a lot of cultural practices that relate to things like the cold and water and snow. Class is another one. So this is our social class, whether we identify as high socioeconomic status, low or medium. That can affect our social identity. So for example, if you're someone who's quite wealthy, typically you might be famous in your respective field, because typically someone who's wealthy either might be, we go to that sort of stereotype at a macro level where they're a celebrity, but also if we look at someone who's like the boss of a social organisation, they typically earn money. Typically if you're at the top, you're well known amongst your organisation and things like that. Family, this contributes to your identity very much in the way that how your family raises you, in the beliefs and values and culture of your particular micro world, really does shape who you are. So if you're taught by your parents to value ideas such as sharing, gentleness, kindness, and even the behaviours that aren't explicitly taught as well. Kids a lot of the time learn by imitating and role playing, which we'll look a bit later on when we look at the psychologist theories. But it's the things that aren't said, more actions. So kids are very observant, you know, so if they see a parent picking up rubbish, you know, they might then become a staunch environmentalist in the future, and taught to value those sorts of things. Your sexuality can obviously affect your identity there as well. This used to be, I guess, very much a micro level sort of thing, but it's very much becoming a meso-macro cultural idea. So people a lot of the time say in their Instagram bios will have a disclaimer about their sexuality, and very as well when we go here to gender as well. You can see the he/she, or the he/him, or she/her, or they them. So people are identifying with their pronouns as well, not just at a micro level now, but very much at a meso-macro level too. So that can create a dimensional layer or sense of inclusion in a group regarding your gender identification. So very complex there. There is one activity I'd like you to do here though. If you could highlight in 3 different colours, personal, social and cultural level identity, and then I want you to correspond those colours with what you think these belong to. So national pride, is that a cultural, personal or social identity? Is social status social, personal, or cultural identity. If you think it's more than one, let's say for argument's sake you think beliefs can be personal, social, and cultural, which is very true. You might want to highlight B and E one color, L and I another, and then EFS another color. So you can multicolor them if you think it's multiple. So that's that. The next point is the social self is a conscious experience in which you become aware of your own personal identity, and this is your identity that's distinct from other people. Okay, it's your core inner self. It's who you are, right down, really deep. It's shaped by your beliefs, attitudes, and values, as well as your life experiences. So that's very much your personal identity, shaped by all of those factors. As children, we imitate adults around us and use pretend and play to become our guide for how to act and how not to act. And I can see that with my son at the moment. We, at the time of filming, are about to have a second baby almost any day now. And we're sort of trying to start imitating how to be gentle, just so that when our baby girl comes around, that he's not going to like throw Lego at her head or anything like that. So trying to teach him to be really gentle. And so we've got this sort of really soft plush teddy bear that's kind of the size of a newborn, and we're practicing getting him to rock, putting it on his shoulder, patting it. He's going shh, and shushing it. So very much kids, especially young children, use that sort of pretend and play and imitate to learn social norms, behaviors, expectations, and how to act in certain ways. And that still continues throughout life. Like, I'm sure, I know I do, you might notice that when you're with certain groups of people in your social setting, that you start to imitate and act like them. You might just start to speak like them, take on their mannerisms. So it's not something that stops once you grow up. You sort of continue to do it throughout the rest of your life. It doesn't happen, I guess, as quickly because you're more affirmed in who you are, but definitely that imitation, pretend and play sort of concept continues on throughout your life. However though, as we grow older over time, we perceive these as choices and possibilities. We choose how we act. Again, always to some extent, but you typically have a lot more control over your own identity, particularly at a cultural, personal level as you grow up. Social identity can sometimes be the one that's very much out of your control, but you sort of weave in and go with it as you go. And then the last point here is that your identity and social self are complex. They're very complex. It's a constant process of reconciling. So reconciling means to come to mutual agreement. So if we're reconciling our differences, we are trying to find common ground. So a lot of the time when you're reconciling between who you are at an inner level, especially you guys as teenagers, and then so sort of between the I and then the me, who is the social self that you portray to the world, or should I say society, as the concept there. So a lot of the time when you guys are growing, you're tussling between those two. You're like, who the hell am I? This person when I'm with this group of friends, I'm that person when I'm with those groups of friends. However, I'm very much like this at home. You're probably going through a bit of identity crisis, but we are going to look at that a bit later. So that's sort of identity in the social self. What I want you to do with this activity over the next page is list at least 5 points in each box. So I want to know a bit more about who you are, and I want you to think about it too. So what are 5 interests you have? What are 5 personality points that you have? What are 5 knowledge, skills, or abilities that you have? And 5 beliefs and values. So I'll give you a few examples so you don't get confused. So I'll just do me for argument's sake. So some of my interests are guitar, reading, soccer, physical activity, like going for walks and the gym occasionally. And for a 5th one, do you know what I really am interested in and really like is, it's going to sound a bit weird, but lawn maintenance, right? There is nothing or few things more satisfying than edging your grass to have like this crisp thin line. I'll take a photo and show you guys at some stage, but I'm very interested in doing that crisp line that you have around the edge on your lawn, and then all the neighbours sit back and look at it and go, that's a good lawn. Anyway, personality. So 5 things about my personality. And when we're looking at personality traits, we're sort of thinking about, think about if someone were to describe you, what would they say? Or how would you describe yourself? So personality, we're going to look at a bit more next lesson, but it's sort of the characteristics that you have as a person. So for me, my personality, I am obviously very funny. So hilarious, you could put there. I am quite an open person. I think I'm an extrovert in my social self, but when I'm my personal self, I'm very much an introvert. So my personality has, I guess, different dimensions. So I'm both an extrovert and introvert, depending on the situation. This is one people often describe to me as being gentle. And then my last personality trait, or 5th one, is confidence. I'm a fairly confident person. Knowledge, skills, and abilities. I think this one speaks fairly for itself, but knowledge might be, so for me, I've got a degree, or a bachelor's, or an honours degree, actually, level 8 out of 10. So that's one thing. I am a really good teacher. That's another skill I have. I play lots of musical instruments, guitar, piano, the kalimba, which I might show in a video one day, the penny whistle, lots of cool instruments. I have mad skills at taking penalties in soccer, never missed one. And the last thing, I would like to say I'm a good parent, but you'll have to ask Patrick. But there's some knowledge and skills and abilities I possess. Values and beliefs, so some 5 things that are core that I believe in. The first one is probably the locus of control, so focusing on what you can control and ignoring, well, not ignoring, but acknowledging what you can't control. That's probably one core value belief. I believe in the power of education. I believe in the idea that you have 1 mouth and 2 ears for a reason. So I believe, I guess, in the power of listening. I am an avid believer in showing kindness towards others where possible. And lastly, with old mate over here, who's just joined us, I believe firmly that dogs are far better than cats. Isn't that right, Bondo? You a good boy? Didn't you say hi to the children? Okay, he's a sleepy boy. So that's kind of what I want you to do. With the summary task, I want you to reflect on this question. Who do you, or why do you think you portray a social self to the macro and meso world, and keep your personal identity limited to the micro world? Thanks everyone, hope you enjoyed the lesson.